what it is all about in terms of principles, mindset, and how it impacts, day-to-day work and delivery at an organizational level. We wanted to have a forum for us to talk about it, and then we'll see what comes out of it at the end of this forum.
Sounds good. Yeah, we're going to keep it conversational. All right. So with that, I would like to introduce Anup. Anup has been in the Agile realm for a long time, I think 15 years plus. He's worked for large organizations such as Capital One and Deloitte, and has also spent a lot of time with the federal government. He specializes in SAFe. I mean, he obviously is an all-rounder, but he specializes in SAFe. And currently he's working as a director of Agile practice at CC Pace. And really, he is very passionate about everything Agile, and super excited to share the stage with Anup. So ladies and gentlemen, Anup.
Okay, thanks, Toby. Thanks for the amazing introduction. For Toby, I have worked with Toby. I had the fortune to work with Toby at Deloitte, and it was a great time I spent there, learning a lot. And I continue to work with him, on various activities in the community. He brings tremendous experience with him. I have seen firsthand how teams benefited from his guidance, and overall now he has accomplished new credentials that allows him to actually teach and certify folks in ICP courses, which I plan to take some of them from him. And Toby works at Ventera as a senior director and leads the Agile practice over there.
Awesome. Now that we got the boring stuff out of the way, let's dig deep into Agile. So what is Agile? A lot of people ask, what is Agile? And a lot of people have misconceptions about what is Agile. So, and we're going to talk about what is not Agile in a few slides, but right now we're focused on what is Agile. So the simplest definition is that it is a mindset which allows teams to deliver iteratively, which is small chunks at a time, and taking into consideration a lot of stakeholder input and feedback. And the focus is always on learning. The focus is always on improvement, and the focus is always on delivering value. So it's focused on value, it's focused on getting feedback, and it's focused on continuously improving. And Agile is not just for software development. It can be used for a variety of different goals and purposes. And we're going to talk a little more about it in the upcoming slides. And Agile is an umbrella under which there are multiple different formats, methods, and frameworks. But Agile itself is just values and principles that guide everything under that umbrella. And we're going to learn more about it in the next couple of slides. So the very basis and foundation of Agile is the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto was written about 20 years ago. Next year on February 11th to 13th is where we're going to celebrate 20 years of the Agile Manifesto. And I think you're the first group of people that I'm breaking this news that something big is going to happen in DC. And please stay tuned for that. Something big is coming to DC, where we're going to celebrate 20 years of the Agile Manifesto. So what is the Agile Manifesto? It is the very foundation of everything Agile, irrespective of what framework or methodology you use within Agile. This is the foundation. And the reason the founders or the co-signers of the Agile Manifesto came up with this was there was a lot of frustration with the way software was being developed in those days. And they said there must be a better way to develop it, right? You don't have to spend months and months on requirements gathering and months of development, and then months and months on testing, and then deliver something which may or may not have value to people. So they came up together. They met in Utah in a ski resort, and they had these conversations for multiple days. And finally, when they came out of their discussions, they came up with these four values that you see on top. So let's talk a little bit about it. So the focus is on people and the communications and the interactions that people have. So it's individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So what this means is that processes and tools are important, but we should give more importance to individuals and interactions. Processes and tools are there to guide you, but individuals and interactions are the ones, is what actually makes a difference. So we should give more importance to that. And next is working software or working products over comprehensive documentation. So these were the days where you had thick software user manuals that were a deliverable, and that would take weeks and months to produce, and nobody would actually read it. And they realized that it's better to have products that work and don't need so much documentation because it's easy to use. It's easy to understand. I mean, when was the last time that you read a manual about how to use your Android phone or your Apple phone? Because they make it so easy to use and intuitive, you don't really have to read that documentation. Again, it's not like documentation is not important, and it's not like in Agile we don't do documentation, but it's just that we focus more on producing the product or software over creating documentation. The next is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So this happens a lot where, you are there to serve the customer. It's a very customer-centric, it's a very people-centric approach. And a lot of times, it happens in real life where, the client is looking for something, but it may not be covered by the way the contract is written, or for whatever reasons. Instead of saying no to them, we should think about how can we make sure that the customer is happy. That's the end result that we're looking for. And by having conversations with them and making sure that their needs are met, takes precedence over contract negotiation. So for example, let's say that, I'm working with a customer, and the customer had originally signed the contract for X number of hours or X number of dollars. And now they've come up with a need and say, hey, we need to change a few things which might add a little bit more time. It could cost you a little more. Instead of spending, days and weeks talking about going through the contract shop, going through different levels of management to make that contract negotiation, it's like, okay, what can we do to make that happen? It could mean that, okay, we take out something which is not as important and do this instead, or come up with anything that can make the customer happy and also not put a lot of strain on the teams, right? So it's about collaboration. And the last is responding to change over following a plan. Now, following a plan is important, but responding to change is more important. So for example, let's say I have to go from here to Waldorf, Maryland, and I start from Reston, Virginia, and I had originally planned that when I was home, I checked MapQuest and it said, okay, it takes about an hour to get there. So I go halfway through, I find out on the radio that there is an accident on 495. And if I go that route, it's going to take me 2 hours to go. Now I can follow a plan and take 2 hours to go versus reroute, ask my phone and my GPS to reroute me to take me through a different route. So maybe I will reach in an hour and 20 minutes instead of 2 hours, but it's better. Instead of 2 hours, I'm reaching in 1 hour, 20 minutes. Original plan was 1 hour, but at least I got there and saved a little bit of time. So following a plan is okay when things are all going well, but there's always going to be change, right? The only thing constant is change. So how do we respond to change? So always be nimble and be agile to make changes and instead of following a plan. So again, Agile is a mindset. It's not a framework. And Agile it houses multiple different methodologies within it. And one of the things that we say a lot in the Agile field is that being Agile is more important than doing Agile. What does that mean is doing Agile is going by the textbook and doing everything that is needed and just following it, versus being Agile is when something doesn't go the way it was planned, you change, you do something else to make your ends meet, responding to change or following a plan. So that, in a nutshell, is the manifesto. And whenever in doubt, when we don't know how to deal with a certain thing, we basically refer to these 4 values. What do these values suggest that we do? And it's very powerful. So please do remember this. And this here is Agile values. And there are also 12 principles. So in addition to the 4 values, there are 12 principles. I don't know if I will go over each one of them, but maybe I can hit some highlights. So the first one, I think we talked about it a little bit. So our priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So yes, this is about software development, but it can apply anywhere else. So basically, it's an iterative process where you are delivering the things of the highest value first, so that your customers can actually start getting the benefits of whatever you're producing. So for example, let's say if I'm in a company that produces TV remotes, and there are about 20 to 40 buttons in a in a TV remote. And do you really need 40 buttons? You probably don't, right? You probably need like maybe 5 buttons to start with. So if I was a manufacturer of TV remotes, I would focus on getting those 5 buttons, giving it to a smaller group of people to get feedback from them, and iteratively add more features to it as we go. I mean, I gave an example of iPhone. I mean, whoever remembers iPhone 4, 5, 6, 7, they didn't have all the features then, right? They had one camera. One camera. How many I don't know, 4 or 5, I've lost count. But they keep on adding more features as they see the need for it. But you're still continuously serving the customer. So the same thing. I'll hit a couple more. Working software is the primary measure of progress. So we're going to learn more about how software development is done using an Agile, but it's not books and binders of documentation. It's not how much software do you develop, but is it working? Is the customer and the users, are they getting benefits from that software? So, and that's why you're always focused on delivering software with the highest value first, so that you get early feedback from them, but the focus is working software. So something that has been fully developed, fully tested, and is ready for the market. Take one more from here. Okay, the last one, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So, we don't wait for 1 year and how it used to be done earlier, which was called lessons learned. Whereas in Agile, we call it retrospective. So lessons learned is slightly negative. It almost has a connotation that things were going wrong. Here we are focused on what went well. What are some of our successes? Let's celebrate that. What are some of the things that didn't go as well? What can we learn from it? And what can we do differently? So continuous improvement, or how it is called Kaizen in Japanese, is the foundation of this. So teams are constantly going into a learning cycle. They get feedback from the customers, they get feedback from each other, and they're continuously getting better. And basically by meeting regularly and talking about how things went, how things, whether they went well, whether they didn't go well, and the changes they want to make, they're continuously improving. Okay, hope that that helps you understand the manifesto and the 12 Agile principles. Please do look it up. This is the very foundation. All right, I'm going to move forward to talk about continuous improvement. I did talk about Kaizen a little bit. And this basically comes from, comes from Edward Deming's PDCA, which is Plan, Do, Check, Act model. So basically, you plan the activity, you do the activity, you look at the results and find out, are we doing the right things? Are we doing things right? Are we building software the right way? Are we building the right software? And asking those questions and getting feedback, and then making changes to the way we are working today. And then that goes in a cycle. So this cycle of plan, do, check, act in smaller chunks really helps, because you're not waiting for 6 months to have that conversation. You started as a team, you start functioning, and then you do this plan, do, check, act. You plan your work and you execute the work together as a team. And then you get together and talk about how can we improve. And psychological safety, camaraderie, supporting each other, better communication, transparency, all those things play a big role in that improvement, because you're working together and everybody is focused on having the team improve so that we are delivering value to the customer. We are focused on the customer, and we are getting better only to serve the customer better. So that's the focus and that's the attitude. And that helps in improving not only processes, but the outcomes. So outcomes and outputs are different. So plan, do, check, act helps in improving the outputs as well as the outcomes. So output could be software, outcome could be happy customers, right? So this is very important in Agile. So I was talking about the various different frameworks and methods that come under Agile. So some of these you might have heard about. There is Scrum, DSDM, which has been there for a long time. There is Kanban, there is XP, there is Lean, Crystal. So there are a bunch of different frameworks which are specific for certain use cases, but all of them have few things in common, which is all of them are iterative, which means that you are in a smaller time frame and you're working for a particular time frame, you're improving based on continuous feedback, and all of them are based on simplicity. It's not complex. You don't need a huge book to learn about it. You start with the 4 values and the 12 principles, and you're ready to go. So if you are interested in learning more about these, please, you can look it up. There's tons of information on YouTube, on the net. Today, we're going to be focused mainly on the Agile umbrella, on the values, principles, and how they're applied. And we will talk a little bit about Kanban, which is very important. And then we're going to talk a little more detailed about Scrum today. With that, here is a very, very high level bird's eye view of what Scrum looks like. I know it's a busy slide, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it because there's a lot more in detail afterwards. So the highlights is it's iterative development cycle, which means one cycle builds on top of the other and it continues building. And these are time boxed to 1 to 4 weeks. I personally have not seen a whole lot of teams doing 1 week. 2 weeks is very common. I've seen 3 weeks. I've seen 4 weeks as well. And depending on what that particular program decides to do. I particularly like 2 weeks because it's a good amount of time to be able to produce a good amount of work. And a lot of times, if teams are doing 4 weeks, they don't produce twice as much results or values in 4 weeks than they do in 2 weeks. A lot of people argue that a lot of those ceremonies take a lot of time, so let's do 4 weeks. But then you're waiting for 4 weeks to get feedback. You're waiting for 4 weeks for the team to meet and do a retrospective. So there is more, I personally find there is a lot more value in shorter sprints, but then I feel 1 week is a little too short. This is just me speaking from experience. But that's a range, but no more than 4 weeks. And I think we're going to hit some of these later, so I'm not going to go on this. So let's look at the chart here. So it all starts with the vision. It starts with a customer need. It starts with a change that an organization is looking for, a new product, maybe a new service, maybe a change to an existing product, whatever it is. So this, basically think of it as a funnel through which all the ideas and needs are coming, and they are put in a document, a living document called a product backlog. A lot of people who are new to Agile sometimes think that backlog is a negative word, because a lot of times people say that, you know, oh, I'm backlogged, which basically means that I'm stuck. Well, in this case, backlog doesn't mean you're stuck. It means that it is a document in which it's a catch-all for all of the items that came from the funnel. And over a period of time, the team works on getting more clarity on them, breaking them down to smaller pieces, and getting it ready where teams can actually start working on it. So that's the backlog. I will just leave it there. We're going to talk in more detail later, but think of it as a big bucket in which everything that came from the funnel is now put. And teams are working in sprints, 1 to 4 weeks. For today, I'm just going to use 2 weeks. So teams are going to work on two week sprint. So they need to find out how much work they are able to do based on their capacity and based on the priority. So they will take on some of the things from this bucket, and that becomes your sprint backlog. And they finalize it, they plan for it, and then they start working on it. So they won't work on it from 1 to 4 weeks where they start executing. And then they have a ceremony called Daily Scrum, wherein the whole team comes together every day. All team members need to be there. And they talk about what they did on the previous day or the last working day. And then what are they planning to work on today? And are there any obstacles? Are there any hindrances or impediments that they're stopping them to produce or deliver what they had planned for that day? So the goal of this is transparency. The goal of this is for the Scrum Master to understand if there are impediments or hindrances that could become risks later. And so that the Scrum Master can unblock those and help the team to make continuous progress. So this happens on a daily basis. It is time boxed to just 15 minutes. And some people call it daily stand-up because it's a practice for everybody to stand. The thought process is that if you're too comfortable, you'll talk for longer. So if you're standing, you want to have the meeting finish in 15 minutes. So that's kind of the goal there. So it's 15 minutes, very short. A lot of teams schedule 30 minutes, 15 minutes for the stand-up, and they have a post stand-up for 15 minutes. So in case any problems that did come up, they can discuss that. All right, so once that happens, so this happens continuously. So the planning happens. This is the implementation every day. At the end of the sprint, there is a sprint review where the team demos working software to to the stakeholders who are involved. So it could be anybody from business, the product owner is there, the scrum master is there, the team is there, any other teams who might have dependencies on the work that you're producing, they are there, and they basically demonstrate how their software works and what they were able to produce in that sprint. And the people who attend this ceremony, and these are called ceremonies and not meetings. So people who attend the ceremony, they give them feedback, they can ask questions to better understand, and really brings a lot of clarity to the business and users. And the team takes the feedback and incorporates the feedback. So this is how continuous feedback comes. The last but not least is a sprint retrospective. We talked about that earlier. This is where the team talks about what are things that went well, what are things that didn't go well, what are some things that we can do to improve better. So an example could be that they had a dependency on an external team that they didn't find till much later in the sprint, and they should have found out much earlier. And what the team comes up with, the action item is that we should identify dependencies much earlier so that it doesn't delay their process mid-sprint. And the team now ensures that they look at it from that lens and from that angle to make sure that any dependencies that they can find out. Obviously, sometimes it happens where you don't know that dependency till much late, but at least to avoid and get better at that. So that's how they keep getting better. And whatever the team has produced is a potentially shippable product increment, which means that each unit of work has been fully analyzed, developed, and tested, and it's ready to go. It's shippable doesn't mean we are shipping it. It's shippable. That means that if there is a need, that particular piece of software can be deployed. So that, in a very high level, is what Scrum is. Next, we're going to talk about Kanban. So Kanban really comes from the automobile industry in Japan. It actually came from Toyota. And it used to be used in manufacturing. And in Japanese, Kanban means, it basically is a card system where it helps the team members visually see the card and how all the information about what they're working on is on the card. And as the card moves from left to right, it is going towards completion. And the advantages of using this Kanban view or Kanban board is that it brings transparency, and everybody who's involved in this process are able to see that. So typically, in a factory, it would be a big board which is in the working area, and any supervisors, anybody from another department can just pass by, and they should be able to see where that particular unit is, what they're working on, and they can also see what is in the backlog. So in simplistic software terms, so this is a pretty complex Kanban board, but think of it very simply as to do, doing, and done. In fact, I have a board here that I had made, still not put stickies on it. I just made it a couple of days ago. This is from an old IKEA table. But so this is a simple one that I have at home. So this is the to-do list where I'm going to put all the stickies that I'm going to be working on. And I'm going to prioritize and put a few stickies here. And I cannot do 5 or 6 things at a time. I need to prioritize and find out a couple of things that I'm going to work on. And then once I know that it's done, it moves to done, which means that I can take another sticky from here, from to-do, and I will look at my whole list and say, yeah, I think this takes priority over the others. I'm going to move it here to this board on doing, and it stays there till it is done. And there is a concept called WIP, or work in progress. So I know that as an individual, this is a personal Kanban board, I know that I have about 2 hours of personal time per day where I could do on various things, right? For example, producing, supporting my Loud and Agile network, or reading a book, or retake a certification exam, or teach a class like this, whatever it is, will be on stickies. And I know that I only have 2 hours per day to reflect on that. So I will only have enough stickies that I can actually have the appetite for. So that is called work in progress, WIP. And that helps you in prioritizing and making sure that the cards are moving. If I put maybe 8 items here, I know they won't work. And if I'm working on multiple things at the same time, it won't get done, right? I mean, it's a basic rule that multitasking doesn't work in real life, right? It confuses you and it actually slows you down. So you should be focused on a few things, do it right, and get it done. So I think that, in essence, is what Kanban is all about. And the goal is, when you're doing this in a large team, the goal is to find out over a period of time where your bottlenecks are. And what do you mean by bottlenecks? So, for example, if you have a backlog and it starts, and then you see that development is taking a whole lot more time than testing, and the people in testing don't have enough work to do, and development is taking more time, then it's stuck at development. So in this case, as you see, development only has 1 sticky. There are 3 stickies in the backlog, and testing has 2 items here. So that means that they could be overloaded. But so you want to make sure that over a period of time, you understand what each team member's capacity is, and you create the WIP limits based on that. Again, so the idea of Kanban is to be able to be working together and to be able to visualize how work is progressing. And if a card or a sticky gets stuck for longer period of time, then other team members help and swarm to make sure that the ticket keeps moving. So what is the difference between Kanban and Scrum, you may ask, right? So Kanban is much more simplistic. There are fewer roles, and it doesn't need a whole lot of Agile knowledge before. And it's much simpler to implement. It's typically used where the number of stickies which are coming are not coming in a regulated manner. And the number of team members that you have could also be fluctuating up and down. So the work is fluctuating, the number of people that you have available is also fluctuating, but you have one thing which is constant is we have WIP limits set for each kind of column so that the team is able to pick a sticky and move it forward. The other difference is that Kanban is a pull system. So what does that mean? So for example, if developers are working on a story, once it is done, they will mark it as development done, and it stays in their bucket till testing finishes what is on their bucket, and they're going to pull another ticket from development. So it's a pull system and not a push system. So this keeps the system flowing throughout continuously. Okay, hope that made sense. And obviously there are tons of videos on YouTube where you can learn more. I highly recommend creating a personal Kanban board if you don't have one. It will really simplify your life and help you take over a lot of situations where we have way too many things to do and we're not getting enough results. A personal Kanban can really help you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Agile versus traditional development. By traditional development, there is a V model, there is waterfall. So those were very common and prevalent, I would say, before 2010, 2008 period of time. Around 2008, maybe 2008, Agile started becoming a lot more popular. I think if you look at it today, very few organizations are doing just basic waterfall. I mean, most organizations either have changed or at least parts of their operations have started becoming agile. So there are different levels of it. And if you're interested, there is an annual report that is published in April every year. So this year they published, it's called State of Agile. And the 14th publication got published in April this year. And when I read the report, I was super excited to see that over 70% of organizations are using Agile in some format. So if you're interested and if you want to learn more, do Google it and find, it's called the 14th State of Agile report. A lot of information there. So let's talk about a little bit. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but so these three are called triple constraint in PMP or PMI language, which is your scope, your time, and your cost. So in a traditional approach, the variable is typically time and cost, and your features are fixed. So you know upfront what kind of work you're doing and how long is going to take to get the work done, and how much is going to cost is typically a variable. Whereas in Agile methods, give me one sec, let me move this widget out of the way. So in Agile methods, the time and cost is fixed, and the variable is only scope. So you might ask, Toby, that doesn't make sense. Well, think about it, right? So we talked about 2-week sprints or 1 to 4 week sprints. That is fixed. The number of team members who are working in your Scrum teams is fixed. So your cost is pretty much fixed, right? Because it's a set number of people and it's a time box period of time. The only thing that is changing is your features or the scope. So basically from the backlog is the team who decides what stories to pick up and start working on. So the scope is the only thing that changes. So now a very high level difference is the time is variable in fixed, whereas we have 2-week sprints. So at least in Scrum, it is fixed. Kanban, it's not, it's continuous, but still the cost is fixed. There is a variable cost because it changes. And what we used to call in PMP and waterfall is peaks and valleys. So your peaks and valleys changes. When you're busy with requirements, your developers and testers, you don't need so many of them. You add them when they're needed. And when the team is focused on delivering and testing, some of the business analysts and others sometimes are moved to other projects because they're not as active. So variable resources, variable cost, the scope is fixed. It is very plan driven, right? They decide upfront what needs to be done and everybody works on it, whereas this is very value driven. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, that is the difference between traditional and waterfall. And so I talked about, let me take a look at time real quick. Wow. So Agile, a lot of people think that Agile means a lot of things, and people go under cover of Agile to do a lot of wrong things, like saying that, okay, we are Agile, we don't have to plan anymore, or we don't have to write documentation anymore, or there shouldn't be any processes, we are Agile. But that's not true, right? You still have processes, you still have some documentations to write, you still have planning to do, but you're doing smaller chunks of documentation, smaller chunks of planning. And it's not like you don't have discipline, but the team works with each other in a more transparent way to make progress. So with that, I'm going to invite Anup to talk about a deeper dive on Scrum. Hopefully you found this segment to be useful. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Anup, on to you.
Thank you so much, Toby. All right, everyone. So we will be taking a deeper dive into Scrum. Like Toby mentioned earlier, there are quite a few different ways of implementing Agile. We're focusing on Scrum because Scrum is the most popular way of implementing it. In the industry, a major percentage uses Scrum, and then the next is Kanban. All right. So let's look at the Scrum ceremonies. Earlier, Toby mentioned that these are not called meetings; they are called ceremonies for a reason because they have a specific goal that you want to accomplish, and they happen in a frequency and a repeatable pattern. So we can go through each one of them. If you have already had some exposure to Agile or have already done some Scrum, you would probably know these. But we'll go through the basics and understand what their true purpose is and the value out of them. All right. So the main ceremonies are sprint planning, the daily stand-up, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. We have added backlog refinement in there as a ceremony. It is not considered a standard ceremony, but we added in there because it is a very important activity for a team to perform in order to successfully implement Scrum. Okay. So let's go through these one by one. So before I get into the ceremonies, let me just define a time box in which these ceremonies occur. Right, the Scrum ceremonies occur within the sprint time box. As mentioned earlier, the sprints can be 1 to 4 weeks long, and most popular is 2-week long sprint. So we will consider that time box to go through and understand these ceremonies. Right. Sprint planning occurs on the first day of the sprint. What the team is doing here is preparing for the work that they are going to do over the next 2 weeks. All right. This ceremony is facilitated by a Scrum Master. All team members are participants, including the product owner. And the goal is to basically go through the prioritized list of work. They're called stories. They go through the prioritized list of work and understand, discuss among each other, collaborate, and figure out what will be the implementation approach, what will be the estimate in terms of size of the work, and decide on a subset of work that can be accomplished in those 2 weeks or that sprint. That is the purpose of sprint planning. A daily stand-up, Toby covered it earlier. We covered all of them, but I'll cover them a little bit more detail. A daily stand-up is a daily, usually in the morning, but teams some teams decide to have it at a different time, depending on their own context, depending on whether the teams are co-located or not. But it's a 15-minute time-boxed ceremony in which everybody comes together. And basically everyone on the team comes together, and what they share is their progress towards the goal of the sprint, and if they have a need for help. This is an opportunity for team members to ask for help every morning, right? The attendees, all team members, Scrum Master facilitates, and product owner is also there. It is great to have a product owner. In the industry, in practical situations, there might be availability issues, product owners, and you might have seen product owners are not always there. But if you are able to get a product owner to attend your daily stand-up, it will tremendously help with team's delivery. Okay. The people who speak are the team members. They provide their updates. Scrum Master also speaks and provides any guidance, any help, or asks for any help that the team members need. There might be people from outside of the team who could attend if there is a need for cross-team coordination and there are folks who want to stay up to speed and in the loop. But the best practice is for them to not speak during the 15 minutes. If they want to provide their input or they want to contribute to a conversation, they can provide their input after the 15-minute stand-up is over, and a meet after, which is basically team members who have further need for discussion stay back. That can be the time when folks who are not on the team can speak up. Okay. product backlog refinement. So we talked about sprint planning, day one of the sprint. Um, Team members go through the stories, figure out the implementation approach, and commit to a scope for the sprint, right? In order to be able to successfully do that, the teams need to be able to look at the work beforehand, prepare for it, prepare for any dependencies, address them ahead of time, and come to the sprint planning with sufficient information so that they can make that commitment, right? That's what product backlog refinement is. The frequency of product backlog refinement can vary based on how much complexity there is for the work that the team is doing and how mature the team itself is. Some teams I have seen only do one product backlog refinement each sprint. I've seen some teams doing 3 to 4. That depends on how comfortable team is with the work. Okay. Um, the goal of product backlog refinement, one thing to clarify here is the product owner brings the business need to the team and discusses, but team also needs to contribute and figure out, discuss among themselves what could be the potential, technical implementation of the business need that the product owner has brought to the team, right? This basically requires the team members to think about the next sprint, because product backlog refinement is always discussions about an upcoming sprint or upcoming work, right? Sprint review. Sprint review is basically the team demonstrating their work to the stakeholders, to the product owner, and to the customer. The audience might be different in different contexts, but basically team is showing their completed work and getting feedback during the sprint review ceremony. This ceremony occurs on the last day of the sprint. Sprint retrospective. This is a ceremony that is usually gets overlooked, deprioritized. Teams, try to get out of it because they don't really see a value. But it is one of the most valuable ceremonies in Agile, in Scrum. In this ceremony, the team members get together and they talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and how it can be improved. That is the most basic structure or definition of what a retrospective is. Right now, there are tons and tons of ways of making it more interactive, fun, engaging, and to get the right kind of information out. But basically, the goal is to meet on a regular interval or every 2 weeks and improve the way we work together, improve the way the team works together, right? All right. Now let's look at Scrum cadence. So if you see the calendar on the right side, it basically shows 2 weeks. And we wanted to put this visual in front of you to kind of visualize how the sprint is going, when it starts, when it ends, and when these ceremonies occur, right? So we talked about those 5 ceremonies. This sprint is a 2-week sprint. It begins on a Wednesday and it goes through the next week and it ends on the Tuesday, right? So those are the 2 weeks. There was a time when folks used to start their sprint on a Monday and end it on the next week's Friday. It seemed like a nice cutoff. But what that did was it kind of affected the team's ability to be productive in the key ceremonies, right? If the sprint planning is on a Monday morning, that's when folks are coming back from a weekend. Sometimes folks take a day off to have a long weekend. So there used to be instances where key people from the team were missing in this important ceremony. It's also very difficult to be highly productive on a Monday morning. So that was one of the reasons, Monday was not the best day. Similarly, Friday, if your sprints are ending on a Friday, similar situation, people try to, make their weekend longer by taking Friday off. So it's very difficult to get people to be really productive and attentive to these ceremonies, even if they are productive individually. To be collectively productive in the ceremonies was difficult on Friday. So slowly the industry matured into how the sprints are scheduled, and Wednesday to Tuesday seem like, or Thursday to Wednesday seem like, the best days to have a sprint. So the first day, sprint planning, you're having a daily stand-up every day. This schedule shows one refinement session, product backlog refinement session. And then on the last day of the sprint, you see the sprint demo, which is also called sprint review, and then a sprint retrospect. That's the structure of the sprint. All right, so let's talk about the work that is done in Agile, right? It's not limited to Scrum, but this kind of work hierarchy can be used in any Agile approach, okay? So we'll start from the top. Any organization begins their work with ideas, with identifying business problems and what the potential solution could be, right? Those are larger business problems with far-reaching impacts, and these are called initiatives, right? These initiatives, when they materialize in terms of something that the organization wants to actually perform and address the business problems, they get formalized into what is called epics. Okay, epics are also, imagine, rocks. These are the larger pieces of rocks, basically, that declare the initiative, that formally announce that the work will be performed, and they have their own boundaries. Okay, so each epic has clearly defined goals that will be accomplished by that epic, that will solve the corresponding business problem that is defined in the initiative. These epics that then get broken down into what is called features. Features are much more tangible description of how an epic will be implemented. They oftentimes correlate with the system that are in question. Sometimes a system is getting built or a system is getting enhanced. The features will directly correlate to those systems, right? The features are still large-sized rocks; they're not as small. They should fit within a release, meaning that if you define a feature, it should be something that fits within a release time box. And these features then get further broken down into stories. User stories are the ones that the team works with, and the stories should fit in a sprint, and there should be a smaller explanation of the business need that can be easily digestible by the team in terms of analysis and implementation. The tasks is something that the team creates when they want to organize their work, and they analyze the story and figure out what are the, the smaller increments or smaller activities that need to be performed to accomplish the user story. Those are called tasks. All right. So the work items that we discussed on the previous slide, where are they stored? I mean, in traditional methodology, we had what was called a vision scope document and a requirements document, and it housed all the requirements, right? And they were locked, and that's when the team worked on them. Agile is different in the way that the business need at a granular level is stored in what is called a product backlog. Okay, a product backlog is basically a prioritized list of business needs. Okay, with the top of the product backlog containing the highest priority business, right? And this is a living artifact. Whether it's an artifact, whether it's a list, it depends on what tool you're using to maintain it. But basically, it is a living list that continuously gets updated. And the events that update it are the product backlog refinement, sprint planning, sprint demo, all of these ceremonies. These are the ones that affect the prioritization of the backlog. Okay. And as the pictures demonstrate, you have items that are being moved up or down. These could be, for simplicity's sake, imagine all of these are user stories, all of these small boxes that are stacked on top of each other. And boxes are being moved up or down, or user stories are being moved up and up or down based on their priority, based on the implementation sequencing, technical dependencies. All of those factors affect the sequence of the backlog, right? And you can see at the bottom, things are getting thrown in the bin. So Agile also allows you to descope items that you realize over time through learning that they might not be adding value, right? Or they might not be adding enough value um, for the amount of time and effort that they cost, right? So this is what is called a product backlog. And the user stories or whatever the items in there are sometimes also called product backlog items or PBIs. All right. So when the items in the product backlog need to be worked on, they are brought into sprint, right? So you must have heard the term sprint backlog if you worked in Scrum. Sprint backlog is not a separate backlog. It is basically a subset of stories that are at the top of the pile, top of the list, and they are brought into the sprint to be worked on. So they are the items, product backlog items that are considered for further analysis during sprint planning. As you can see from the picture, tasks are defined for these product backlog items. Some teams do that, some teams don't. It depends. But basically what we're trying to say here is a subset of product backlog that is being worked by the team during a sprint is called a sprint backlog, right? And these are the items that basically are higher priority. So when teams are doing backlog refinement, when they are trying to analyze the backlog items that are at the top of the list, they're basically taking these high priority items and going through the backlog refinement process. These are the items that eventually make it into the sprint backlog. But what is backlog refinement? Again, it is basically a team activity in which team members get together and talk about stories that are coming up in future, that are not being worked currently, that are coming up in future sprints, and figure out what would be the implementation approach for these, what would be the size of these, what kind of dependencies they have, what is the complexity, and try to address them ahead of time so that they can get to the sprint planning with enough information to be able to. That is backlog refinement. Right. Let's look at user stories. So we talked about product backlog items, and they are primarily made up of user stories, right? So what is a user story? Subsequent slide will be doing a deep dive on user stories, but basically they are a description of the business need and contain what does the business need and
Anup,
what
you're breaking up.
value they provide, right? So when a product owner is writing user stories, what's usually the person? Okay, it's like I'm having some internet issues.
Did you come? Do you want me to go back or are you good?
Let's go back.
Okay.
All right. It started to rain outside, and somehow that affected my internet. So apologies for that. But let's go through the invest guidelines. Invest guidelines talk about what are the best practices to write a user story, or what are the best characteristics.
Anup, you're breaking up. I can continue and finish this one. So basically, invest is invest is a way to know where how to know that your user stories are of good quality.
INVEST invest stands for independent negotiable. All right.
Anup, you were breaking up, so I was trying to skip and cover the slide.
Okay. Why don't you do this? Cover this slide and let me see if I can get my connection to refresh.
All right. Okay.
And
Yeah.
stable.
So the simplest way to think about it is that invest is a method of looking at how to make your user stories of high quality. So in short, invest stands for independent. Each story should be independent so that they can be developed and tested separately. The scope of each story should be negotiable so that you are not writing each and every detail into the user story to begin with. And the developers or people who are actually going to develop the product should be able to use their knowledge and the information they have and the skills that they have to develop that particular story. So it's like if somebody tells you, for example, hey, I want my basement to be painted and I want you to paint it red, versus telling a contractor, we want a bright, lively color in my basement that puts us in a mood of being happy, right? Or something like that. So the contractor may come and say, look at the amount of daylight that is coming in, the kind of furnishings you have, the kind of carpet you have. And based on that may suggest to you that, you know, like a burnt orange might be a nice color for you. And they might want, you know, give that option to you to paint it burnt orange. Versus if you already told them that you want it to be a crimson red, then your basement is going to be crimson red. And if there is not enough light coming in, it's going to become very dark. So stories should be negotiable, which basically means that you should say what result you're looking for, but don't tell them how to do it. The teams will work on it and come up with that. Valuable, as I said earlier, the whole thing about Agile is that we are delivering value to the customer. So if there is no value in a particular story, it goes to the trash bin. Higher value stories, they surface to the top. Lower value stories, they kind of lurk around at the bottom. And at some point they get thrown away. Small, so the story should be enough size, shouldn't be very big. They should be of a size where the team is able to work on it and deliver the product. And since the sprints are 1 to 4 weeks, and we are taking an example of 2 weeks, the story shouldn't be so large that it doesn't take too long to be able to develop it. So each sprint, the teams are analyzing, developing, testing, fixing any bugs that come out of it. And if there is any documentation that needs to be updated, they do that as well. So you don't want to take up very large stories. So you want to constantly be breaking stories into the smallest chunk possible. And that's what happens during refinement. And last but not least, each story should be testable, because if you're not able to test it, you cannot vouch for its quality, and you want to have the stories in such a way that they're testable. So if they're not independent, they're not negotiable, they're not valuable, they're not estimable, they're not small, they're not testable, don't work on it. So basically that's a good formula for a good story. So what is a user story? I think I talked a little bit about it.
Do you want me to cover?
You can cover it. Yeah, you can cover it.
Okay. And if my connection goes unstable again, please feel free to take over.
Yeah, it's fine now.
Yeah.
Maybe you can stay off video to conserve your
bandwidth. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Toby. So let's get into the user story. These are some of the aspects that sometimes get ignored because, let's just write the business need and let's move on, right? Well, no. A user story is designed in such a way because it delivers some kind of, it provides some kind of boundaries so that the business need that is defined truly delivers value, right? So let's look at the structure of the user story. The user story is structured as a role, I want to the goal, so that the benefit, right? These three aspects, we'll go through these one by one, are very important to have in a user story so that what you write as part of a business need truly delivers value and can be implemented. Right? As a role, one of the common mistakes some of the teams I have seen do is they are writing a story for their own role. That is not true. As a role, meaning a role of a user or a customer or an actual user of the system, right? So think about when you're writing a user story, you're writing for an actual user of the system. Okay? I want and then the goal. The goal is basically what the system should be doing. This is the most tedious part. It is, it was already something that we have been doing even when we were doing traditional approach, right? But this is the most important part that comes after the goal, which is the benefit. And it gets skipped sometimes when teams don't write, good user stories. But it is very important to capture what is the benefit delivered by whatever goal you're trying to accomplish, right? We should be able to articulate, we should be able to clearly state what is the business value out of implementing a user story, right? So an example there, as an airline passenger, so imagine a product owner or a developer or a business analyst writing this user story, right? As an airline passenger. So they are team members, right? They are not writing a user story for a developer or a product owner. They are writing it for an actual user, which is airline passenger. I want to be able to check flight status. That's the goal on my mobile app so that I can make my flight. This is the important benefit that is outlined there. Why are you checking your flight status, right? So that is the structure of a user story. Right, here's some more, another example. As an account manager, I want a sales report of my account. So account manager is the user. Sales report for the account to be sent to my inbox daily is the functionality or the goal of the user story, so that I can monitor the sales progress of my customer portfolio is the business benefit, right? Now you see here acceptance criteria. Obviously, writing user story in one sentence is not enough information for a team to actually implement that user story. They need further details, right? That's called the acceptance criteria. Further details that allows a team to figure out how to implement the story. And it also allows, since it is called acceptance criteria, it allows the product owner or the stakeholders to use that criteria to validate whether the business need has been met or not for that user, from that user story, right? So on the right box, you can see acceptance criteria is a list of criteria that must be met for a story to be fully delivered, tested, and verified. So there are various formats. Now, initially, when folks started writing user stories, the acceptance criteria were plain and simple statements. But as the agile industry matured, and as more and more tools came into picture, the automation came into picture. Um, uh, Certain formats basically prove to be more beneficial for accomplishing those things such as automation, right? So given when then, given a precondition when an action is taken, then a result is accomplished. That format is one of the common formats that is used where automation tools are in place that can actually read acceptance criteria written in this format and create tests, automated tests that can be implemented to validate whether the acceptance criteria is met or not. Right? It's a little counterintuitive to write it that way, and it's a little bit of a struggle to do it the first few times. But once you get into the habit, it becomes second nature to write acceptance criteria. Right?
All right, excellent. You covered all those topics in very good details with some personal experience there as well. So that was really good. So let's talk about execution. So we talked about what a backlog is. We talked about a bunch of things. So let's talk a little bit into detail now of how the flow happens. So basically, we talked about the funnel. So from the funnel requirements or user needs, everything comes into backlog, product backlog. And I purposely put the word grooming here, just so you know this word as well. Initially, refinement used to be called grooming, but over the years, we have gotten away from the word grooming and start using refinement. Some organizations still use the word grooming. So just be aware that grooming and refinement are interchangeable, but refinement is the more current way of calling it. So once you have the backlog, it goes through continuous refinement iteratively, and depending on how mature the team is. So let's say a brand new team which has started working on an initiative, their backlog may not be very healthy. Healthy backlog means how many user stories are prioritized, refined, have acceptance criteria, and all that information ready for the teams to pick up. How many stories are in that ready state? If they don't have enough stories in ready state, then it's not a very healthy backlog. And they might have to meet more often. Mature teams sometimes, they meet once a week. Newer teams could meet, multiple times, like maybe 2 times in a sprint. And I meant to say sprint and not week earlier. But yes, so that is the process. So now, once those are in a good state, before the team actually takes it, they want to make sure that it meets a definition of ready. So what is definition of ready? So the term definition of ready in Agile means that the story has all the information that is needed for the team to start working on. So it should have, clearly stated end result, but it doesn't have to say how it is being done, but the value is written, and it meets the acceptance criteria, and it checks off everything which is in your invest criteria. We learned about INVEST. So a definition of ready is basically based on your invest criteria. And the team picks up the number of stories based on their capacity. What does capacity mean? So capacity means how many people, how many team members are in the team, how many of them are available and working that particular sprint, and based on their past throughput or their past outputs, they will decide, okay, our team can do X number of story points in a sprint, and they will pick up the stories only if they have met the definition of ready, and then they start working on it. And I'm not going to go over this because we talked about it a couple of times. And they work on the story, and then it has to meet a definition of done. So not to be confused between definition of ready and definition of done. So what does definition of done mean? Definition of done means that the story is done. Toby, you're not making any sense. What do you mean done? Okay, now I'll explain. Done means story was analyzed, it was developed. It was analyzed, it was designed, it was developed, it was tested. Any issues that were found during testing were fixed. Any documentation that had to be done is taken care of. The story meets the acceptance criteria. So there was an acceptance criteria that Anup talked about. If the story meets all those conditions, then it's considered to be done. So just to make sure everybody understand, definition of ready means, is the story ready to be picked up by the teams to develop it? Definition of done means, is everything that is needed to be done, is it done? And can the product owner accept the story as done? Does it meet all the acceptance criteria? And definition of ready is, does it meet all the invest criteria? So that's the difference. And once it is accepted and approved, it goes through a sprint review or a demo. They get feedback on it. If they have to do some touch-ups and work, they will do that. But basically, all the stories that are accepted now become PSI or potentially shippable increment. That means it's ready to be shipped. Doesn't mean that it will be deployed, but it's ready for consumption. Okay, so that is the story, the way the execution works. And while this is taking place during the sprint, the team is, in addition to the execution, they're also focusing on stories that are coming up for next sprint. So they are doing some work here as well, so that the flow is continuous. Okay, so I talked about definition of ready, I talked about invest, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but I hope you understand the difference between definition of ready and definition of done. Again, just to reiterate, definition of ready means the story is ready for the teams to start working on. Each story is adequately defined and it meets the invest criteria. Definition of done means the story is done and it meets all the acceptance criteria. So that in a short. So definition of done is can be defined at different levels with different amounts of information. There are organizations where there is definition of done at the sprint level. There is at the system increment level and at the release level. And all of them, so all of these could be defined upfront so that everybody understands what is the definition of done at each level. And what this does, because everybody knows what the expectations are, and it's a shared understanding, and definition of done can be reviewed and updated from time to time as the team matures or the program matures. But since everybody is clear, the expectations are clear, it really helps in improving the quality of work that is being done. With that, let's talk about some roles. So in Scrum, there are only 3 roles: Scrum Master, Product Owner, and the development team. All together, they are called the Scrum team. So now the number of team members ideally should not be less than 5, and preferably not over 9. You want to keep the team small, and you want the team to have all the skills which are needed to finish the kind of work that you're working on. Couple of things from a highlight perspective is that this is a self-organized team. We don't have a project manager here who tells the team what to do. The team works together and they self-organize themselves. Again, it doesn't mean that it is cowboy country and people can do whatever they want. There are so many factors, and there are working agreements in place. There are expectations which are set. They work based on that, and they're all focused on delivering value to the customer. I think I covered most of it. It's definitely based on respect, and the goal is always to be delivering value, right? So again, the product owner is focused on more external facing, but is supporting the team in every way possible, is the conduit between the business and the development team. The Scrum Master is a servant leader who's focused on ensuring that Agile values are being followed and the team is continuously improving, and they're focused on delivering value. And the development team consists of people who do development, consists of people who do testing, consists of people who do analysis, design. And if you notice, I didn't say developer, tester, and BA. I said people who do development, people who do testing, and they could be doing multiple things as well. So you could be a developer, but you could also be helping in testing. You could be an analyst by trade, but you could also be helping in testing. You could be a tester by trade, but you are also technical, so you could be helping in other areas as well. So basically, we are working together as a team to support each other going forward. In the next slide, we go a little more into detail, but I think I covered most of the items, so I'm not going to go a whole lot into detail. But really quick, the Scrum Master, as I said, is a servant leader, doesn't do power play, doesn't do command and control, doesn't tell people what to do. He or she helps the team in bringing out their best. And also, every day in the stand-up, when he or she finds out that there are impediments, the Scrum Master tries to resolve those impediments and blocks the team from any external disturbances, and protects the team from that. And also is the person who facilitates all the team ceremonies and meetings. Off late, in the last few years, I'm seeing that Scrum Master is also called the team coach in some organizations, because he is coaching the team members in following Agile values and principles and continuously improving. So that's the product owner is basically, as I said, is the conduit of communication between the business and the development team. They understand the capabilities and skills of the team members. They understand the pain points of team members, and they are focused on making sure that the team is building the right product. What does that mean? That the right items are prioritized, the biggest value items are prioritized. He or she accepts the story. He or she owns the product backlog, and with help of team members, writes the user stories. In some organizations, the product owner does everything by themselves, but in most teams, it is a team activity where he or she is supported with that. So that is the product owner and the development team. Doesn't mean development team means only developers, right? Development team means the team that is developing the software, and it has all the skills that are needed to get the work done. So for example, if it is a team that is working on, say, cloud migration, they would have people who are specialized in that kind of work. If it is a team that is building more front-end related work, so they would have people with more of skills that are needed to do that. I talked about cross-functional. Sorry, I skipped the slide by mistake. They're cross-functional, so basically they have all the skills that are needed. So why is that important? That's important because you want to reduce dependencies with another team. So in the past, it used to be such a way that DBAs used to be a matrixed group of people that used to serve multiple projects. And always there was a problem because there are few people with database expertise, and that used to be a bottleneck. Now each team has a person who may not be the ultimate expert, but knows enough to get the work done. And if there is a need, they have reach-in capabilities to other people in the program. But basically, there is a person in the team who can do database work. There's a person who can do front-end work. There's a person who can do testing, and so on and so forth. So this is, in a nutshell, the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the development team. All right, so now we are up to Agile activities, and we'll bring back Anup.
All right, thank you, Toby. Is my connection fine? Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes, very clear.
All right, so we are at the tail end of our session, and I want to leave some time for us to do some Q&A. So what I'll do is I'll go through these slides at a slightly faster pace, and then we'll switch to Q&A. All right, so team working agreements. What are these, right? So basically, when an Agile team gets together, they are first formed. They go through various, basically, it's called forming, norming, forming, storming, norming, performing, meaning that the teams are getting formed and they are adjusting with each other. Now, in order to make sure that the team is able to collaborate with each other and is able to work together and deliver value, one of the things that it is recommended that teams should do is form working agreements. It seems like a very obvious and common sense things to do, but you'd be surprised how many teams actually skip. Team working agreements, they cover the basic stuff like how will we meet on a daily basis, where will we sit, where will we how will we communicate with each other. Core hours is basically if you want the team to be together. For co-located teams, core hours usually mean that the team is sitting together in the room and is available for discussions, impromptu discussions on a time limit. So setting some rules for the team members so that everyone is able to work with each other, learn from mistakes. All questions are welcome to create a more friendly environment within the team. Team members usually come from various backgrounds, different levels of experience. So in order to make sure that folks who are new, they feel welcome, and the team builds maturity and builds its own collaboration over time, right? So Team working agreements is a very important activity that team should do. Most, uh, frequently it is done when the team is formed, but it is important to revisit these agreements at a regular basis and make sure that they still hold true for them. All right. Story points. This is in my Agile coaching experience. This has been one of the most contentious topic for teams when they are adopting Agile. Even for teams that have been doing Agile, when there are changes in the team, this seems to get affected on how teams use story points. I have seen teams, even programs, resist the use of story points. But for the success of an Agile organization, I would say story points or a relative estimation is a very important aspect. So to draw some contrast between what this is compared to the previous approach, when there was no Agile, when industry had traditional approach, a waterfall approach or iterative approach, and there were no story points, the method of estimation was an absolute method of estimation. So imagine a golden retriever and a chihuahua, right? If you were to ask how big is a golden retriever, you would say maybe 50 pounds. How big is a chihuahua? Maybe 15 pounds. So you have an absolute number to specify their size, how big they are. But when you're working in an Agile approach, you are actually continuously discovering the business need and the implementation approach, right? When you're going through that, you're not going to have an absolute estimation of the work items, right? In this case, in order to be effective, in order to be able to plan your work, what you need is a relative way of estimating. And that's what, story points is one of the relative ways of estimating. Now you see here t-shirt sizes, extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. These are also relative estimation, right? If you are in US, small, medium, large could mean something different than if you were in Asia, somewhere in Asia, right? But what is a medium compared to a small? What is a large compared to a medium? It still holds true, mostly from a ratio perspective, anywhere in the world. Okay, so that's what relative estimation is. Now let's look at story points. Story points give us a quantifiable way of doing relative estimation. Okay, I did a session today, actually, a 2-hour session just on story points with one of my teams in order to make sure that they are able to use it effectively. So story points is basically a way of measuring the overall effort of the work. Now, effort doesn't mean just the amount of work that you have to do, but it also covers factors such as complexity of the work, factors such as what is known about. Let's use a user story as a way of limiting ourselves in our thought process. When you are estimating a user story, you are accounting for the amount of work to implement the user story, the complexity behind that user story, what is known, meaning what you already know about it, and what are the unknowns. And all these aspects are quantified in the form of user story points. So that's what user story points are. In order to make sure that we are making an effective use of story points, one of the methods is to use what is called a modified Fibonacci series. And this series is basically designed intentionally in such a way. So you have stories that are very small, that they could be 1 point, one user story point, and you could have stories that are, or you could have units of work that are much larger in size, and they could be 20, 40, or 100. But basically, the reason the Fibonacci sequence is used is if you have smaller units of work, you know much more about them, and that's why the numbers 1, 2, and 3 are right after each other. They are in sequence. They don't have any distance between them, so to speak, right? But if you look at larger numbers like 13, 20, 40, they are much farther apart. You do not have the option to choose 15 or 25. Why is that? This is because as the unit of work that you are trying to measure, it is larger in size, so is the number of unknowns, so is the complexity. right? When you have more complex work, more unknowns, the numbers are farther apart to prevent a false sense of accuracy. So if you think something is not 13, maybe it's larger, then you have to choose 20 to account for that uncertainty and those unknowns, right? That's the reason we use modified Fibonacci series, right? Now, the way teams use it, one of the most common approaches in using Fibonacci sequence for estimation is called poker plan. It's basically a team activity. So compare this, I'm going to get into poker planning, but compare it to the traditional way of measuring work. In the traditional approach, project manager used to work with a technical expert to go through the project plan or scope document, figure out what needs to be done, work with the technical expert to figure out how long it will take, number of hours, number of days, put it in a project plan, and then call it the plan that the team will implement. Now, the team members obviously were never as, did not have as much expertise as the technical expert who initially helped the project manager to put together that project plan. So the numbers that were in that plan never really hold true for a team, right? They have their own expertise and exposure and background. So that used to significantly affect the deliverability and the success of the project. In order to address that, what Agile does is, Agile says the work should be estimated by the people who perform the work, right? It doesn't matter what level of expertise they have. Since they are going to do the work, it is justified that they are the ones who estimate. That will be the most accurate estimate, right? So the way poker planning is done is basically the team gets together, whether they are in a room or they are together online in some kind of a collaboration tool, and basically the product owner explains the business need in the form of a user story, and the team then discusses, has some back and forth Q&A, and figures out an implementation approach for the user story, and then collectively they size the story. And there is an approach to that. The first round, the Scrum Master is the one who's facilitating the first round. Everyone provides their estimate or the size of the user story in terms of story points, right? Everybody shows their card. Usually people use card if they are together, or sometimes they can also use a way to collaborate on one of the collaboration tools, but everybody provides their input at the same time so that their input is not affected by anybody else's opinion, right? This allows for everybody to have an input, and not the loudest voice in the room is having the most input. Once everybody provides their story size, the team looks at those sizes and figures out what are the maximum and the minimum. Why is there a difference in size? And then there is a discussion to build consensus, right? This activity is one of the most valuable activities in estimating user story, right? It allows for accounting for things that people did not think of. It allows for cross learning between the team members, that over time makes the overall team cross-functional. And it allows for a collective consensus on the size of the story that will be actually implemented by the team. So the commitment from the team is much more valid. That consensus, after discussion, when that consensus is built on the size of the user story, that size is allocated to the user story, and that's what is Agile estimation for relative size. All right. And another aspect of Agile is reporting. Metrics and reporting, has been an integral part of managing any kind of initiative, project, any kind of activity in any organization. So Agile also has its metrics. But one of the important aspects of these metrics is the organization and the people who are using these metrics need to know what they are for, so that they are used for the right purpose, right? I'm going to go through some of the commonly used metrics, but what I would recommend is, if you are using metrics in your organization, it's important to learn the true reason behind a particular report or a chart, and only use it for that purpose. Okay. So some of the common metrics are burn down chart. A burn down chart is used during a sprint to see at any given point whether the team is on track to meet the sprint goals and how much of work is left. So notice that I'm not saying how much of the work is done, I'm saying how much work is left. So a burn down chart shows, the burn down chart has an ideal line from the start of the sprint to the end. And on a daily basis, when the team makes their updates in any tool that they are using to manage the work, most of the tools these days generate these charts automatically. And these charts show how much of the work is left for that sprint. That's a burn down. Another version is a burn up chart. Tells a similar story but has a little bit more information in it. You can see, if you're seeing on the screen share, the top red line kind of shows if there is new scope added to the sprint and how the team is progressing in terms of completing the work. That's a burn up chart. Sprint report is usually a combination of multiple metrics. It shows basically how the team is doing for a sprint. It includes the burn down, burn up. Velocity chart. Now, what's the velocity? The number of points that a team is able to accomplish on an average in a sprint is the velocity. Usually, it is calculated by taking an average of the last 3 sprints of how many story points a team completed. Okay, so this velocity chart that you're seeing here shows how many, the gray bars are showing how many points the team committed to in a sprint, and then the green bar shows how many were actually accomplished. It basically gives you an idea of how accurate the team is getting at predicting, forecasting their commitment, and then actually meeting them. Cumulative flow diagram. It's called CFD. It's a very useful diagram to have a high level picture of how the work is going for the team in terms of overall larger body of work. So let's say if you're working towards a release, these different colored bands are actually showing what status the work is in, right? So it could be showing the green color is work completed, purple is work in analysis, blue is in development, and yellow is in initial consideration. So that type of stuff. So it kind of shows how much of the work is in different statuses. It does allows you to see how much of work is in progress at any given point in time, so you can make WIP limit decisions based on this report. Version report is, there are various names for reports that provide a similar information: release report, version report. Basically, how you are progressing towards your upcoming release or upcoming version of your system. And there is much more detail. We can go into these metrics, but we just don't have the time. But basically, there are many other reports that systems generate these days that allow you to manage your programs, manage your teams. All right.
All right.
Folks, this is basically the last slide. Basically, what we tried to do was give you an introduction to Agile, and I also wanted to make sure that we are talking about the Agile from a mindset perspective. So we went through some of the principles, the values, and then some of the practices. Right. Goal here is to make sure that we are doing the right stuff. We're basically making an organization truly be agile instead of doing the agile and just the mechanics of it. Toby, you want to have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so just want to add, right? So you brought a very good point, Anup, that being agile is more important than doing agile, which basically means that I meet so many people and they say, "Oh, we're agile. We have daily stand-ups." I'm like, and no, we just have daily stand-ups. So they're still doing things the old-fashioned way, but they have a daily stand-up and they feel that they're agile. So doing a stand-up is not being agile, but being flexible, being transparent, respecting each other, focusing on working on the highest value things, basically living the manifesto and embodying those values on a daily basis is being agile. Doing is just doing the ceremonies, but not really getting the values out of it, right? So we want, the reason that we wanted to share all this is to give you a good perspective of, what are the agile values, what are the agile principles, what are the different flavors of Agile out there. When do you use Kanban? When do you use Scrum? And understanding some of the basics of Agile. So hopefully this was a helpful session for you where you learned something. And Agile, this is a journey. This is not a destination. We are here to help your journey. If you need anything, you can reach out to us. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. We are happy to help you move forward. So we have, Anup, we have about 10 minutes. So if you have questions, please put it in the Q&A.
Yeah, we have some really good questions here. Toby, so one of the questions was, who attends the daily Scrum meeting or the daily stand-up? I think I covered it in detail while discussing the ceremony in terms of who can attend and who can participate and who can speak during the ceremony. So we can. The next one, Agile uses stories for documenting requirements. So is there any use to have detailed planning, like having a project plan, since having timelines is not being flexible as per Agile? Right. So let's cover this question. Agile does not say that you should not have a timeline or a roadmap. See, whether you're using Agile or not, an organization is always working towards some kind of goal, whether it is taking a product to the market or meeting a regulatory deadline. So it will always be important to have some kind of time, right? If you're not working towards some of these, you might be working towards a market opportunity. So it is important to actually create a timeline so that we can meet that. And time boxing is actually one of the core tenets of Agile. You should time box your activities, whether it is day-to-day stand-up or a year release, right? So yes, having timelines.
Add to that, Anup,
yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that I heard someone say in a conference is that plans don't work, but planning works. So it's a very simple statement, but it means a lot, right? So I remember in the waterfall days, we used to create the plan just for the sake of creating the plan because it was a deliverable. You had to create a communication plan, you had to put together a risk plan. And this is in the beginning of the project, of a 9-month project. How do you know what those risks are? How do you know how the communications will change? But it was a deliverable, so we had to write a plan. So writing the plan should not be the goal, but planning is important, right? So you should have a good understanding of what is it that we are trying to achieve and how are we going to get there. So incremental planning is good. And Shishir, to your question, if you are planning for X number of months at a time, it's not going to work because change is a constant. Everything that you have planned for is likely to change. So it doesn't make sense to have a very detailed plan for a very long time. So in Agile, you would hear the word roadmap more often than plan. A roadmap is, okay, we are in Horizon 1. We have a good plan for everything in Horizon 1, which means in the next maybe month or so, what we're going to do, we have a good plan for that. Things beyond a month, we have a good enough plan. I think it's going to change a few things. 3 months, yeah, we have an idea what we're going to do. 6 months from now, yeah, it's on paper, but we have not really gone deep into it. So to answer your question, planning is important, but not having a very detailed plan because things are going to change. Hopefully that answers your question, Shishir.
And then there is further follow-up that many times users don't even know what they want at the level of detail. So those details won't be there in a user story. Is it better to create tasks to analyze and gather requirements? So interesting question. And you might be in the less than ideal situation in terms of in the way the organization is using Agile. But basically, a good Agile implementation is where the team is working in collaboration with the product owner to define the user stories in the product backlog. So I know there are situations where teams think that a product owner should be coming to you with the need. Well, they should be providing us with the user stories. Well, they should be bringing the business need to the team, but the team should collaborate with the product owner to define those user stories, right? We are working in an agile approach where we're not working for 3 months to write all the details of the requirements and lock them down, right? Just like a team is implementing on a minimal level of information available for business stories, the product owner is also continuously working to define the business need in almost a just-in-time fashion. So we have to recognize the both sides of the coin, and and understand that for a product owner to define the business need and the user stories, they need help from the team. Now, there might be organizations that don't involve the team until the stories are actually brought to the team and asked them to implement. But the right approach is to include the team in definition of the business need and its implementation. So hopefully that answers the question. Go ahead.
There's one more question, open question. Does Scrum Master lead all ceremonies, including backlog refinement, or are they led by both the Scrum Master and product owner?
So I would say instead of leading, I would say Scrum Master is more of a facilitator.
Right.
Right. They are a servant leader. So yes, they do have to demonstrate leadership qualities and they do have to do some activities that a leader would do. But they're also a servant. And the goal here as a Scrum Master, who, like Toby said earlier, is also supposed to have a coaching mindset, is to create a self-organizing team. Meaning that if the Scrum Master is not there, the team should still be able to go through their ceremonies, right? So a Scrum Master is usually the one who facilitates most of the ceremonies. The product owner, in most ceremonies, even in planning or product backlog refinement, they are the content provider, meaning that they bring the information. They are the ones who are bringing the business need and might be the one who is speaking most of the time if they are introducing a story or a business need to the team. But they are the ones who are bringing content to these ceremonies and not really facilitating.
All right, I think that brings us to the end of questions. Are there any other questions? We have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, feel free to type it in Q&A, or you can also type it in the chat.
Anup, how do we see chat? In webinar mode, we still
might not be able to if you are presenting.
Okay, no, it is there. All right, so we have about 2 minutes left. If all of you who are here, if you could describe our session in one word, what you got out of it or what you felt after taking the whole course, if you can please type it in the chat window, how you felt today's session was, so we get some feedback. One word, maximum 2 words. While we're doing that, there is a question. Is there a situation when Kanban and Scrum are used together? So yes, so there is a concept called Scrumban, which uses best things of both Scrum and Kanban. So the difference between Scrum and Kanban is that Kanban, as I said, things are just bouncing, balls are coming your way, and you don't have a way of controlling how many things are coming your way, and unlimited kind of quantity coming, and you're basically trying to make sense of it and make it flow. Whereas in Scrum, your team members are fixed, your timeline is fixed, only the scope is changing. So a lot of times Scrum teams actually look at a Kanban board during their execution because it gives them a good sense of how the stories are flowing. And we're also bringing in the best practices from Kanban, which is looking at the visual of how the card is moving, paying attention to work in progress, because you're limiting the work in progress. So a combination of Scrum and Kanban is very relevant, and it happens. Now, one more case is that at the program or at the executive level, when they are prioritizing epics, they typically would use a Kanban view. It's simpler. It really gives them a clear picture of how those epics are prioritized. And the execution teams might be using Scrum, but the leadership team might be using Kanban for that. Another example of that could be that in a program, the teams that are doing software development are using Scrum, whereas teams which are doing production support and O&M support, they are using a Kanban board. So those are some situations where Kanban and Scrum is used together in the same program. Awesome. So we are exactly at 9 o'clock. So we got some good feedback here. Good refresher, got clarity on Scrum roles and responsibilities. Awesome. Very knowledgeable. Thank you, Lakshmi. Informative. Abba, Vicky Brown, super informative. Shalini, really enjoyed listening and refreshing Agile knowledge. Excellent. Good session. All right. So excellent. Thank you so much. Hope this was useful, and let's please be in touch. Happy to connect with you on LinkedIn and support your journey. Thank you. And I'm gonna...
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.